This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Kathy Worthington. Welcome to our latest episode of Late Boomers. Today we have as our special guest, photographer and cinematographer Jeff Berlin, who has shot beauty and fashion layouts for top magazines and brands, including British Elle, Vogue Italia, L'Oreal, Miss Vogue, Estee Lauder, Esquire, and many others.
And I'm Mary Elkins. He is also a coveted celebrity and rodeo photographer. And as a cinematographer, he has shot films for Sony and the fashion label Norma Kamali, to name a few, as well as a number of music videos and commercials. His films Rey and The Wrangler have garnered attention, and his short film Stormchaser has been honored on the domestic and international film circuits. He's a passionate aviator and has also edited and written for aviation magazines such as Flying, Plane and Pilot, Pilot Mag, and Pilot Journal. Welcome, Jeff.
How are you? Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you.
And please
It's great
tell
to be
us,
here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Please tell us about your background and how it influenced your career choices.
Oh gosh, my background.
Yeah.
I really feel that growing up in New York City, and my parents actually had a big influence on the path that I took, because my grandfather started his business in Soho in the 1930s, and my dad. It was a picture framing and matte board manufacturing. So it was related to the art world. And so I grew up, my dad went into that business as well. And I grew up, some of my earliest memories growing up in New York are Soho before it's the Soho that we see today. And when it was all, manufacturing. And, always having grown up peripheral to the art world, I feel like that was a big influence on my life and my sensibilities and where I ended up going with everything. And I grew up. My mom would drag me around New York, and she would just go shopping and take me to all the stores, and it was fun. And she always had Vogue magazine lying around the house, which was kind of funny because my Playboy was Vogue magazine, and because I thought the girls were beautiful, and but I liked fashion. I started liking fashion, and in college, I ended up going to school for communications. But I did start to assist a fashion photographer, like I was an apprentice for a fashion photographer down in Dallas, Texas. And that was kind of my first, touch point in the photography and fashion world. During college, I did take a couple photo courses that really kind of sparked my interest in photography on a deeper level, especially like the history of photography. I think it's so important in whatever you choose to do that who came before you.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, in aviation, I've been very involved in aviation. When I took over Plane and Pilot magazine as the editor, I instituted a series of articles every month. I wanted to hit aviation history every month because aviation history is so rich and so colorful and fascinating. And there's so many incredible stories in aviation history, and it was the same thing for me in photography and learning who the great masters were and who came before me. And that also, when you're a young photographer, you're still trying to develop your sensibility and your style and your sense of self. And so you emulate a lot, and you're trying to find yourself by looking at others' work.
Well, I have
And
to
Did you
so
ask
go to
you.
school for that?
I can, yeah, I could talk for an hour about just that. So,
Well, I have to ask you how those roots in still photography and in your background shaped your sensibilities as a cinematographer.
well, I I spent many years developing. If you wanted to work as a photographer, especially in fashion, it was important to have an identity.
Mm.
Or else why would somebody hire you over the next person? And so I spent a fair amount of time developing, finding a style. I found what resonated, after shooting a ton of different things and so many models. I figured out what worked and I found out what I wanted and I found my path. And then I went to Europe for 6 years and developed it further there. And in
Hmm.
Europe, I started working, back in the day, if you wanted to shoot high-end editorial for magazines as a young photographer, you weren't going to do it here in the US. You were going to get
Oh,
your break. No, not here at all. You were,
huh.
especially as a new young photographer, you were only going to get stuck shooting front of books, service stories, things like that.
But which country
Um,
did you go to?
so I moved first to Italy, to Milan, and I
Mhm.
spent 3 years there. And then I went to Paris, and I spent another 3 years in Paris.
Oh my goodness, lucky
And
you.
oh, it was amazing. It was transformational. But that kind of took everything to the next level. And it also taught me about collaboration, because I learned that, yeah, in New York, you learn a little bit because I always tried to have good hair and makeup or whatever. But, for me, when I started working in Milan or Paris on a much higher level, world class level, so to speak, shooting L'Oreal, for example, or Vogue Italia. And there was this section of Vogue Italia where, like, the new up and coming photographers in Milan, a selection of them were getting invited to shoot. And that was, super prestigious and super cool. And,
Yeah.
I'm one of the few photographers in the world who could say that they've shot for Vogue Italia, and I'm very
Mhm.
proud of that, although I always will be.
Wow.
And,
That's
but
amazing.
all that experience, shooting for all these clients, all over Europe and then back here in the US, you develop your eye, you develop your sense of style, you develop your sensibility, you learn what's good, and you learn lighting, but you learn lighting in a very specific way. So it's the transition to cinematography was it's a different world. It's apples and oranges, I learned. Um,
In what way?
well, the lighting is completely different. The cameras and the technologies are completely different. The only thing translatable is sensibility and your visual sense,
Mhm.
and that's been the best, I think, the best preparation for me. It's funny as a cinematographer, I think it's important to have a style, but I think it's also important to have a style that can become anything
Hmm.
because you want your images to support the story and the director's vision. You don't want to put too much of a thumbprint on those images that you're making because it has to fit what you're doing. So, that's been an interesting thing too. But once, the thing is, no matter that, you always have a sensibility for what's in that frame and for balance and for shot craft. And so I
Mhm.
think having worked for so long in fashion and celebrity portrait and even aviation and Western lifestyle, um, that has all contributed to the way I construct a frame in cinematography as well.
Hmm.
And then the
Excellent.
collaboration, working on a world class level, working on the highest levels of advertising and editorial, that's a collaboration with stylists and hair and makeup and what, editors and creative directors and all of that. And, even though on a fashion shoot, the photographer he's the DP, he's the gaffer, he's you know, the grip really on a film set, you're just the DP and you have gaffers and grips. Yes, I had assistants as a fashion photographer, but it's a much more of a team sport, cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about that working on jobs like L'Oreal, where it was much more of a team. So
Well,
it's all very translatable. Yeah.
as you said, you spent years traveling the globe and probably many other places you haven't mentioned during your career and living overseas. And how do you feel like that influenced you in your work? Besides getting the jobs, obviously, that was a great part of it. But do you have some interesting stories about those years?
I mean, I think, I could talk about how, for example, shooting for Vogue in Milan, I was shooting a very, very specific style. Well, first, growing up in New York, I don't speak Italian. I do now quite pretty well, I think. But, I went over there with my makeup artist, hairstylist girlfriend, and we broke up within a few months of being there, which,
Oh,
that happens.
oh,
And, but, I was surprised how, I had traveled a bit as a kid, but, I was surprised in Milan and also Paris, actually, how much I actually had to learn the language to function.
Hmm.
mm-hmm.
And so, so for me, it was always, I love language. So it was very, I worked hard to learn Italian. I actually had an agent in Milan. Her name is Laudomia Piccolomini Frontini di Sciata.
Oh,
That's a mouthful.
it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
I'm actually
Beautiful,
going to
but
see her in a couple of weeks south of Paris, so I'm very excited. She's become a lifelong friend. But I spent a lot of time with her and her family, and you have to learn Italian to function there. I had editors and people that I worked with in Milan who did not speak English. I had to learn how to speak. I like to say I speak fashion French, because I can,
mhm.
I can't watch the news on TV, but I can do a photo shoot and talk about hair and makeup and styling and photography and
That's
function,
great. That's great.
day to day. But it was a transformational experience living overseas, and I couldn't recommend it more to anybody. Everybody should travel. Paris, Milan, Italy, Rome, I've been all over Europe. I worked in Germany. I had an agent in Munich for a while, and, London's amazing. But, it's you grow as a person and it expands your creative envelope.
Oh,
Do you have any great
yes.
stories about those years?
Oh, what I was going to say, I don't know, great stories. You know, you, I was shooting a very specific style at that time using a view camera. This was all before digital,
Yeah.
and so I was shooting. It was a view camera, so the film was 4x5 sheet film like this, and it's like that old style camera with the accordion in the middle, and you look in the back of it, and there's a big and you so it's one frame at a time. It's not like digital now where you have a 64 gig memory card with 2,000 images on it, and
Yeah.
you can just shoot and shoot and shoot. You have to be very, and I think this actually trained me very well for working now because it forced you to be very deliberative in your work.
Hmm.
Because I
Mhm.
shooting for Vogue, you know, clients would always limit how many frames, how many rolls of film you would have, or with Vogue, it was how many sheets of film. So they literally gave me 6 sheets per shot. So I had 6 frames to get it. And they said, beyond that, you're on your own. You're going to have to start paying for the film if you go over your film limit.
Well,
And
Wow.
so, that was, and it wasn't cheap then, and so, I'm just a kid over there. I was very young. I was really punching above my weight class, shooting for these magazines and advertising clients, at 25, but and I would say the other really fun story, my Vogue Italia, some tear sheets had just come out, and it was this one shot of a bracelet that I did, and I decided I wanted to start checking out Paris because in Milan you really could only work for the Italians, but in Paris it was much more of a city of the world, and you could work for clients from everywhere. It was just a much more cosmopolitan city. I mean, I miss Milan. I'm excited. I'm going to be in Paris in 2 weeks. I'm very excited. These are cities of my life now. I'll always go back. And but so I get to Paris, and back, as a young photographer, model agents could be very, very helpful for your career. And I had this one agency in Paris that I was working closely with called Viva, and there was a booker there that, again, before cell phones. So this one agent was kind of acting as my booker as well. She was booking her models and then booking me. And so she would field calls and I would check in with her. And one day I just got to Paris and my tear sheets had come out from Vogue. And I'm like, hey, Marie, what's happening? And she's like, well, I got a call today saying it's Jeff Berlin in Paris. And she's like, well, yes, he is. And so she's like, you have an appointment at this agent tomorrow. And so I go to this agent's office and show her my portfolio, and because your portfolio back then was an actual book of
Mm-hmm.
prints. And she looks through it and she nods. She's like, oh, okay, uh-huh. She's like, you have, I think the Vogue Italia tear sheets might have been already in there, probably right at the front. And she's like, okay, you haven't, there's an advertising agency looking for you. And so you have an appointment at this advertising agency on this day, say Thursday at 2 p.m. So Thursday at 2 p.m. rolls around. I walk into this advertising agency and I go into this boardroom, and there's my Vogue Italia bracelet photo on enlarged on an easel. And we're sitting around this table. How do you like Paris? Blah, blah, blah. And I didn't speak a lick of French then. It took a minute to learn French. Knowing Italian first helped a lot. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, they're like, oh, they're telling me what's happening, and I'm like, well, what is this for? They're like, oh, by the way, you do know what this is for, they said. I'm like, no, 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 I don't know what this is about. They were like, oh, you're up for the Dior campaign.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, gee.
based
And
on that
so
bracelet, based on that
Yeah.
based
bracelet
on
photo.
that shot from Vogue Italia, and I was like, oh, wow, that's really exciting. I mean, welcome to Paris. And I asked them, I had the sense to ask them, well, who else are you considering? And they said, it's just you and one other photographer. His name is Christian Moser. And I knew as soon as I heard that name. I said, oh, it's great to be in this room and on this playing field, but I'm not going to get this. I knew it in my head. Because Christian Moser was, I'm this young upstart just in from Milan. I have a handful of tear sheets from Vogue, and I'm just really scratching the surface and breaking in. But Christian Moser was older, much more established, shooting for, I could reel off a number of magazines that he shot for, Italian Marie Claire, Italian Marie Claire, a number of the Elle magazines over there. And I'm just like, gosh, darn it. I know he's going to get it. I'm not going to get it. I'm too young and new. And that's what happened. But still, it was like, wow, maybe Paris is something I need to look deeper into. And I ended up,
Absolutely. It
I ended up
sounds
moving to
great.
Paris after that.
Oh, well, that's what a great story. Let's talk
Yeah.
about your films a little bit. Tell us a little about your narrative short film, Stormchaser, and also talk about Rey and The Wrangler. Do you have any back stories about those?
So Stormchaser was it's a really fun film. It was written and directed by a good friend of mine named Gretel Claggett. And she's a super talented writer, director, super creative. And it's about this, it's about this woman who has a fascination with storms, but she's not a storm chaser per se. The film isn't about that. It's really about a woman who, I wish I had like a really good, like concise sentence about what it is. I should have that. But it's about a woman who works selling storm doors and siding and roofs for this classless, corrupt. She sells these door to door for this classless, corrupt boss down, in some fictional town in the Midwest called Shamrock. And it's really a story about, life and ambition and feminism and things like that. And it's a great story. And we
And it's
shot it up
winning
in.
awards.
It is. We shot it up in Vermont. It's actually won a couple awards for the cinematography, which really makes me proud. But it's won a lot of awards for the writing and the and as a film itself. It's 27 minutes long, so it's almost like a little featurette. It's really entertaining and fun. It was a great experience, and we shot that. It also looks really good because we shot it. I own a certain camera called a Sony Venice, and it's one of the it's one of the best cinema cameras you can own right now. It's the film, like it's the camera that they shot the new Top Gun on, for example.
Oh,
And
wow.
Oh, wow.
a lot of the shows that you see on Netflix are shot on Venice. So it's really an amazing camera. So I own one, and we shot it on that, and it just looks, you know, I think the production value of Stormchaser also looks really amazing. And
Is
so
there
it's
any
something that I'm really
platform?
proud of.
Is there any platform right now that's streaming Stormchaser
It's
where
not, it's not,
people could?
it's
Oh,
still, there's a cut down version of it that is also going around to certain contests. So I think once it finishes its circuit of contests, I'm sure the director will, put it up for
right.
streaming somewhere, but
I hope
still
so
not available online.
because it sounds
Yeah, it's
wonderful. I'd like
cool.
to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
It's
seen a trailer of it, and it's really exciting. And were those real tornadoes? Were they special effects?
it was a combination of special effects and real tornadoes, but we didn't shoot them. That was kind of stock footage that
Mm,
was
yeah,
purchased, and yeah,
yeah.
but it was fun. It was well done. It was, the lead was she was on Reno 911. I mean, she was the lead actors on that film also were so great, and it was just like, you know that which is so important.
Yeah.
And you were recently the
Yeah.
DP for the Los Angeles segment of a documentary about the Brazilian pop star Anita. So tell us about that.
Well, Anita, well, I'll touch back on El Rey and the Wrangler too, but
Okay. Sure.
Anita, you know, that really just came to me through a friend of mine who is also a DP, and that job actually came to him, but he was unavailable, so he just passed it over to me. But one thing that's fun is that with this DP, he's a good friend of mine, and he usually, he'll give me the call a lot when things need to look pretty, and because of my long background in fashion, um, he thinks I just make people look pretty, and that kind of came through that. Anita she's becoming a big star all over the world, but she's a big star in Brazil, huge pop star. Like she has something like 62 million followers on Instagram.
Oh
Wow.
my
And
gosh.
she came up here to play on the main stage at Coachella, and we shot her the week leading up to that, her rehearsal with her show and in the soundstage in the valley, and it was really fun to watch that process and to be kind of a fly on the wall for that process, as watching the show come together through the week, where in the beginning of the week she's just kind of going through some motions and they're figuring it all out, and by the end of the week, in the days before she goes up to Coachella, they're really doing it and they're really in it and they're dressed, and it was a fun progression to shoot.
Yeah. What
Sounds
about
like
and
El
it.
and
Rey?
then
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, El Rey, one of the things that's really cool about the Sony cameras is, the ecosystem, from the Alpha cameras all the way to the Venice and, like El Rey and the Wrangler, like the Wrangler was shot for the mobile phone division of Sony, where that's a film shot 100% on a cell phone.
Oh,
Mm,
really?
And if you looked at it, it's super cinematic. You would never know. There were certain things that might be telltale. Oh, this might have been shot on a phone or something, but you might not know it. Really, to me, like the depth of field, you don't have a lot of control over that. But otherwise, the images are great and they're cinematic, and it would mix well with, really any other Sony camera, like one of the Alpha cameras or the mirrorless cameras or any of the video FX cameras. Like Anita, we shot on the FX9, which is a great run and gun documentary camera. A lot of documentary and reality TV is shot on that camera. Um, El Rey was shot on the FX3 and FX6. And so,
mm,
like just to start with the Wrangler, it's the story about some friends of mine who are cattle ranchers that they live out about an hour outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And they live on I don't know, 80,000 acre cattle ranch. They're on this
mhm.
huge cattle ranch. And I met them actually at the rodeo.
Hmm,
And I got to know them at the rodeo. I went and photographed them first at the rodeo, and we've been friends ever since. And
hmm.
so when this project came up, I'm like, it'd be really fun to shoot something Western. So I called them. I'm like, hey, what do you got like Western coming up? And they're like, well, we have a branding coming up. And I'm like, all right, let's shoot the branding. So I went up there with my friend, who's also a DP, and we took a couple of the phones and outfitted them and configured them to shoot video. The phones have this really cool feature in them called Cinema Pro mode. And so the phone actually functions like a cinema camera. So we shot it like that, and it was super fun and it looks great. And I'm really proud of it, actually. Um, and plus, it's always fun to do cowboy stuff, I
Oh, I
mean,
bet. Yeah.
cowboys and horses, and so much fun.
And they're all
And
celebrities to you, aren't they?
oh, I
The,
mean, it's they're kind of celebrities to me. I mean, it's such a cool world to be in, that I discovered back from the rodeo.
well, tell us
And
a
then
little
El
bit about
Rey,
your work with celebrities.
well, the celebrities was a natural progression of the fashion that I did. Um, I mean, because I just, I was good at in photography at just making people look beautiful, and celebrities want to look beautiful in pictures. So it really kind of came from that in a very organic way, where um, I was friends with this actor that was on a very popular TV show, and we were hanging out, and I did some photos of him. I went down to visit them at set, and this was a show called Ally McBeal back in the day.
I
Of
love Ally
course.
McBeal.
And we did some pictures. I did some photos of him and one of his co-stars. And all of a sudden, I started building this portfolio of this body of work of actors and celebrities, photographing them around LA. And, I was doing a lot of bouncing back and forth between New York and LA, shooting fashion and celebrity. And it just kind of grew in a very, very organic way. And I shot some stuff for networks and a bunch of editorial, celebrity editorial, and it was just really fun. And shooting actors like Jamie Presley and Amanda Peet, and shooting galleries and Alyssa Milano, and just whoever, Kurt Russell. I mean, there's a ton of different celebrities. So
What is it
you know,
like to work with them? Do you have any great anecdotes?
I mean, Kurt Russell was super fun because he's also a pilot.
Oh,
Um, or Treat Williams, also a pilot, and I was working on this celebrity pilot project where, uh, like I became, I got to know Treat Williams a little bit, and he does a lot of TV, and yeah, avid pilot. And so one day, um, when you're pilots, you really bond, so we became friendly. And, Christopher Reeve was also a very avid pilot, Superman.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And one day, Chris, Treat calls me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to go up to Christopher Reeve's house and spend the afternoon, go up and have lunch with Christopher Reeve and go talk flying?" And I'm like, who doesn't want to go hang out with Superman? And so this was after he was injured too.
Oh,
Oh,
And so we did. We went up there. We drove up to upstate New York and, you know, spent the day with, afternoon with Christopher Reeve talking about flying and horses and aviation and Superman and how he talked about how he used his knowledge as a pilot to help the flying scenes in Superman look better.
really?
And yeah,
don't you wish you had that whole afternoon on video?
I I do. I do. It was an incredible thing. He talked about, how he was frustrated about how he got injured because it was something that he'd done 1,000 times. And,
Yeah.
it was a very moving, impactful afternoon, I can tell you, you
Yeah.
know, and
We also know that you're a rodeo fan and you've directed and
yeah.
shot projects for the Professional Bull Riders Association. And what do those projects require of you?
Well, I think it's important, it works out. So, I think to really do a good job in what you're shooting, and this applies to anything, but it really directly applies to, rodeo and to aviation, um, is you have to really understand the world to be able to capture it smartly, you know? Um, like for example, when I'm shooting rodeo, um, I you 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 get special, I want access to the best angles. And those are places that they really don't want people bumbling around, like up at the bucking chutes where you have 2,000-pound bulls and horses bucking around in their chute. And if you put your arm through the bar and that bull bucks up, it'll break your arm. So you
Uh,
just,
Right.
you need to know that world
Well, did you ever
or the
have to ride a
aviation
bull?
world.
Did you have to learn to ride a
Well, I
bull?
would never get on a bull, but I did. The thing is this: the way I got into rodeo was a very specific thing. Cirrus Aircraft. It came through aviation, where Cirrus Aircraft, which is a big airplane company, the most popular single-engine piston airplane in the world. Um, it's the Cirrus SR-22, their flagship airplane. Well, they have the jet now, but piston-wise, incredible airplane. That's the airplane that I flew to Brazil. I've
mm,
flown it all over the world, all over the U.S., Central America. Amazing airplane. Um, Cirrus called me one day years ago, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to come to Duluth, which is where their factory is, Minnesota? Pick up an airplane, fly it to Colorado, pick up a cowboy, and fly to rodeos for a week and write a story about it." And I'm like, "Rodeos? Flying? Are you kidding? Of course." So, so I did just that. So my entree to rodeo was traveling around with a champion roper,
Oh,
a
nice.
team
what
roper
an
and a calf tie down
experience.
roper. Yeah, he was a team roper and a calf tie down roper. So I learned all about rodeo from traveling with him. And so I learned all about how rodeos are governed by a governing body like, Major League Baseball or NFL or all the PGA for golf, USTA for tennis. So the rodeo world has the PRCA, the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. And, I think it's so, when you're traveling with a rodeo cowboy, you learn how to be at a rodeo, where it's safe to be, where you shouldn't go, how to interact with that world.
Hmm.
And so when you're around the bucking chutes, you know where you learn where to stand, where you can't stand, how not to interfere with the judges because they have to have an unobscured view, um, how not to get in the way of the cowboys and what they are doing, but still get your angles. So you it takes practice and you have to learn that.
Hmm.
But I know how to do that, and so I get invited back, and my pictures have appeared all over, and I've been profiled in Cowboys and Indians magazine and American Cowboy magazine, and for my rodeo pictures. And for me, I think I just want to also be very clear. My rodeo and Western pictures are very informed by my fashion and portrait background. So, most rodeo photographers that you'll see, it's all shots of bucking horses in the arena. Like, whatever. We've seen that 1,000 times. For me, rodeo is all about the people. And so, when, like, for example, the guy that used to handle the PR and marketing for the Reno Rodeo would say, Jeff, I really love watching you shoot because when all the photographers' lenses are pointed one way, yours is pointed the opposite direction.
That's
And,
Mhm.
great.
because for me, it was about getting that iconic shot of the people, because these are cowboys and cowgirls, they're not playing dress up. This is their world. This is who they are. And I want to capture that. Another shot of a bucking horse we don't need.
Hmm.
That's
So,
great. What are
yeah,
your thoughts on the movement to ban rodeos? Because some people complain that they endanger animals.
I have a really specific viewpoint on that. People should, so first, I don't know, I've been to the rodeo 100 times, maybe. So I've, it's not my first rodeo. Okay. And I think I couldn't be a supporter of rodeo, and I couldn't endorse rodeo or get behind it or want to promote it if I felt that I love animals. If I saw animals being abused, or if I felt that animals were being mistreated, I couldn't be enthusiastic about rodeo. Um, People should know that, as I mentioned before, that there's the PRCA. So PRCA sanctions rodeos. There's no rodeo season. Rodeo starts in January, and every December, there's the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas, where the top 15 cowboys and cowgirls and top animals compete for awards. Rodeo animals are also seen as competitors.
Really?
Rodeo bulls, bucking bulls, and bucking horses are also considered athletes. And
Mhm.
the top bulls and bucking horses are awarded prizes and buckles at the end of the year. So the people that bring these animals to a rodeo are called stock contractors.
Huh.
And stock contractors invest a lot of money and time in raising these animals from birth to be athletes. And so when a bull, like I have a friend who raises bulls, and she tells me that when the bull is back at the farm, she can walk right up to it and get onto it. But when the bull is in the arena, it knows it's time to turn it on.
Really?
Mhm.
And one thing I should speak one, and I'm not done. It's important also to know people think that that flink strap that people put around the bull at a rodeo binds its balls, for want of a better word. That's not true. It's like it helps. It's a trigger for the bull to buck a little better, but it's only like if you and I put on a belt one notch too tight. It is not hurting the animal. There's no barbs in it. It doesn't touch the animal's, you know, boy parts, and it's not. It's nothing more than something that's a little bit, like if you put your belt on one notch too tight. Literally, that's what it is. There are more rules. This is very important. The PRCA governing body has a rule book. There are more rules for the welfare of the animals in the PRCA rule book than there are for the human competitors. That's how important the animals are in this sport.
Huh.
And if it weren't like that, I couldn't get behind it.
Interesting.
So, PETA, look, I'm all for it. Look, I donated my last car to save the whales. So I
That's
love
fabulous.
animals. But, I think PETA, they're using misinformation to go after rodeos.
I think that's an important point that a lot of people have never really heard that point of view.
Well, I'm seeing it from the inside.
Hmm.
I'm seeing it from the cowboy's perspective.
That's
Yeah.
a really good
And
point. You made some really
yeah.
good points there.
Yeah.
And can
And
we
of
also
course,
ask you,
yeah.
I want to,
No, please.
please tell us what sparked your interest in aviation?
I wanted to be a pilot since I was a kid. I couldn't actually tell you what sparked my interest because it's just always been there. My mom likes to say that she thinks like that I was maybe a reincarnated World War I aviator or something because it's just always been there. And
Maybe
it's
you
not something
are.
that's maybe it's just not something that's, it wasn't in my family, but as soon as I could afford it back in, gosh, it was 1994 and I shot a catalog and a bunch of advertising for a department store. And I took a chunk of cash and I went to a flight school that a friend recommended. And I said, "Oh, teach me to fly." And I got my license, and getting my pilot's license changed my life. It was it's still to this day one of the best things I've ever done. It's affected me personally and professionally, and it's been a life changer. I recommend everybody should go out and get their pilot's license. I mean, it's not easy, it's very hard and it's
Well,
expensive, but it takes you have to really want it if you're going to get it.
do you only fly the Cirrus, or do you fly other planes? And also, I have to know if you've ever done acrobatics in the sky.
So I'll talk about the aerobatics first. I started training in aerobatics. I don't know why, but I got interested in it really early. Before I finished my license, even I started doing
Ooh,
some aerobatic training, and it was
Yeah,
on a very basic level. Just like spin, which is where you kind of fall toward, spin towards the ground,
that's
loop, and
pretty
then a roll.
scary.
The thing is, you can't help but be a better pilot once you go through aerobatic training. The only airplane ever that I could literally jump in like it was my car and walk and fly away was is the Cirrus SR-22. That's like putting on a pair of jeans.
Hmm.
But I've flown everything from a Piper Cub to a DC-3 to an F-16, and
Wow.
um, I've yeah. And so, because I've been lucky enough to do a lot of aviation writing, there's an airplane called the TBM 850, and now there's so many versions of it. And with every evolution, 850, 860, 920, 940, So, but it's a single engine turboprop. So it's a jet engine connected to a propeller with 6 seats. It's like a Ferrari in the sky. It's a $3 to $4 million airplane. It's, a serious airplane. They make them in the southwest of France in a city called Tarbes. And I went to school to learn how to fly that airplane, and I've flown it twice across the Atlantic from the factory back to the U.S. And
wow.
flying long distance in an airplane is like a road trip. Because I've gotten to do so much aviation writing, I've been able to fly so many different types of airplanes, and it's also the more experience you have, the more conservative you become too. So the types of airplanes that I will not fly has grown as well. So like when I was the editor in chief of Plane and Pilot, so I was on every newsstand across the U.S. and it was my magazine. As editor, I would come up with the recipe. And there were airplanes that I didn't even want to cover.
Hmm.
I would constantly be pitched ideas. Well, how about this airplane? How about that airplane? I'm like, no, no, no. We'll do this one instead or that one. Because, aviation is inherently unforgiving and hazardous and, lethal speed, lethal altitude. And, I think, the more you learn, the more conservative you become. I don't want to, I don't want to die in an airplane.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, we have covered a ton of topics today, but what do you
Yeah.
think you'd like for our listeners to have as a takeaway today?
Oh, man. I mean, we've really, really only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I know, but so
You'll
many
have to come
subjects.
back.
Yeah.
So many
I mean,
subjects.
so many things. If there were one thing that I could impress upon people tuning in, and if they've stayed this long, I hope they have, is that they should set their sights high, and that they should know that not only should they set their sights high, but they can achieve whatever they go for. Because that's what I've done. That's how I've lived my life, is deciding, you know what, I want to do that. And then I find a way and I go do it. And not only do I go do it, but I've made it my work and my passion in my life. So
Beautiful.
find out what your passions are, figure out a way to make that happen, and then go do it. And because there's no excuse. Anybody can find an avenue to realize their passion and experience it. And I've done
love
it
that.
numerous times with fashion and photography and film and cinematography and aviation. Like everything has led to another thing. I wanted to become a pilot, but being a pilot, I discovered rodeo just in a very organic way. And that led me to, a passion project about rodeo. And, aviation led me to, being a photographer led me to celebrity aviation and celebrity pilots. And photography was an entree to that. And photography became an entree to cinematography. And, find the key to the world you want to be in, because you'll always, if you put your mind to it, you'll find a way to find that key.
Oh,
That's beautiful.
Jeff, that is beautiful. Thank you so very much. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been the multifaceted and very passionate Jeff Berlin, photographer, cinematographer, pilot, rodeo, fan writer, and magazine editor. You can reach Jeff on Instagram at JTBerlin.
We want to remind our listeners also to follow us on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. We hope our podcast content is bringing you joy and inspiring you. You can write to us on our website, lateboomers.biz, B-I-Z. Thanks so much for listening, and please subscribe to Late Boomers on your favorite platform. Thanks, Jeff, so much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a lot of fun.
A lot of fun, too, here on this side.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.